Hi, this is Carl with another SOP video for managed service providers. Today I want to talk about managing the flow of tickets into your system. Now, many of you have the first response of, oh, I can't regulate the flow of tickets. I don't know when Microsoft is going to go down, right? I don't know when a client's going to have a problem or hire a new employee or whatever. Well, this is one of those misconceptions where people take a little truth and they turn it into a big falsehood. For example, some people say, well, there's no point in having standard operating procedures because every technician is different and every client is different. Well, true, we are all different, we are all unique, but the reality is there's only so many ways to set up Microsoft Office, cloud services, storage, right? Emails, go on and on and on. And you probably try to have as consistent as possible of a setup across all of your clients. And so the reality is we take some of the uniqueness and we standardize it to a higher standard that we can maintain. The result is the client gets better standard procedures and they have more uptime, so forth and so on, and you get consistency. Now that is not unrelated to the fact that there's a truth that you don't know when clients are going to have problems, but we extrapolate that into a misbelief that we cannot regulate the flow of tickets into our system. When you think about tickets going through your system, think of it literally like a conveyor belt in any kind of systematic process. There's a point at which something enters the system and it moves along the conveyor belt, and eventually the problem is solved, the ticket is closed, and it moves out of the system. You get to control almost every piece of that, and you get to control every piece inside your company. You cannot control clients. You can't control what happens to their systems or when they do something they shouldn't, or they get attacked from the outside, or some vendor that they use has a problem, right? You don't control most of the world, it turns out, but you do control your processes. It's one of the great, absolutely unbreakable rules of service delivery. You cannot control people, but you can control your processes. So how do we do this when it comes to managing the flow of tickets in your system? Let me start with a different truth that you can build a foundation on. And that truth is backlog is not a bad thing. Backlog is necessary. Backlog is another word for time inside your ticketing system that allows you to show up for work next week, the week after, the month after, the year after. Backlog is not bad at all. It needs to be manageable, it needs to be controllable, and it needs to be of the right size to balance service and response. So clients need to see that they are getting a good, effective response time, but that does not mean that everything is a crisis. Too many people believe that as soon as something comes in, they have to deal with it immediately. And so they get into an emergency, always on, freaked out time frame, and their attitude is always that everything's outside of their control. That's not true. Now, there's many things you can do to manage the flow of tickets. Let's start with thing number one, which is every system should have a default priority. And in my opinion, so we have a 4-tiered system: emergencies, and then high, medium, and low. So you can call them, priority 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's the 2, 3, 4. It's the high, medium, and low priority that we want to focus on. Well, think about it. The average ticket should come in as what? As a normal priority, as a medium priority, not low priority and not high priority. Now, a lot of the low priority stuff can be scheduled, which is a beautiful thing. So if a client says, hey, I need this done, I need some printers moved, you can do it the next time you're in the office. You can say, okay, that's low priority, and we will schedule it for whatever, the 14th. Great. Now we've got a few weeks, and we can just wait until that time gets here. We're already scheduled to be there, probably going to do some other things at the same time, knock out a bunch of low priority tickets. The client is happy, everybody's happy, things are being taken care of at an appropriate speed, and you don't have to rush around. The beautiful thing about the medium priority, the average priority, the normal priority, is that you can schedule this work. Now, when I owned MSPs, our norm was always that we wanted, if it's possible, and it wasn't always possible, but we want, if it's possible, for every ticket to be closed in 72 hours. Which means client's got a problem, they enter a ticket, we manage it through the workflow, and within 3 days, it's definitely out of the system. And that worked probably 99% of the time. There are true emergencies. That's a different story. You do not build rules based on the exception to the rules. You build them on the day-to-day processes, right? So for us, that meant that tickets came in, they were a normal priority, expected closure time was going to be 72 hours later, okay? Now, we didn't talk to clients about all of that. That was our internal process, and we actually wanted to be, and we were almost always faster than that. We were almost always within a couple of hours because most tickets are not emergencies, right? So managing things that way, having a normal priority goes a long, long ways. And so once you've got that set up as your base, as your understanding, then you can say, okay, how do we deal with the rest? A huge chunk, like literally take all of your tickets in the course of a month. There's a huge chunk that are recurring tickets. We're going to do monthly maintenance. We're going to test the backup. We're going to verify that this is happening and that's happening, right? Once a year, we're going to take care of these certain tasks like stress testing the backups or the battery backups, right? There's things that we do occasionally. You do not probably update the firewall every day. Probably don't update the firewall every week, but you might do it every month. So whatever your schedule is for whatever those things are, you take all of your tickets, a huge chunk of them, and for some of you, 40% of your tickets might be scheduled work because once a month, you're going to take care of the monthly maintenance, testing the backup, and all of the other monthly chores that need to get done. And as soon as those are done, the system reschedules it 1 month from today or whatever. And so now you've got a whole chunk of your ticketing system where things are scheduled, right? They're not low priority, but they are scheduled, and they are not something that's urgent in the next 1, 2, or 3 weeks. In fact, they won't be urgent unless you miss the date altogether. So no matter how many clients you have, whether you have 100 clients or 1,000 clients, when you take and schedule a whole bunch of work, you've got a backlog, you've got time in the system that says, oh, I know how many people I'm going to need on staff next month, next year, right? You can begin scheduling things out. Again, where we make money in managed services is scheduling labor, right? And even though you're not charging by the hour for most of this, you have to schedule the labor. Otherwise, you let everything get bunched up into the emergency category, and there's just far less money dealing with emergencies than there is with dealing with a sustainable, ongoing, known quantity of work where you can decide, okay, how many people do we need this day, this week, right? Who gets to take a vacation? Who gets to take time off? Whatever it might be. So you've set the priorities and you've scheduled a whole bunch of work. That literally takes care of, for most of your clients, I mean, that's probably well over half of all of your tickets, and it might be closer to 70 or 80% of your tickets. So what you see is that regulating the flow within your company automatically kind of regulates things a little bit. If you think about how a flow works with regard to electricity or with water or with any kind of mechanical process, there are things you can put in place that are called regulators that sort of regulate the flow of how things come in. You know, your technicians shouldn't ever have to worry about how many tickets are coming in or how fast they're coming in. Your service manager should, and you should have a service manager or a service coordinator. Even if you only got 3 people, somebody has to have that role of being the service manager. And certainly if you have more than 7 people, that role should be played by somebody other than the owner. Please, 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 please. If you have 7 or more people and you haven't hired somebody to take care of the service department, please do so. And if you're not sure why, schedule a Zoom call with me. So the coordinator needs to have the job of taking all of the input and saying high, medium, and low priority. And you should literally have written definitions. High means this, 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 right? The entire company is losing money and it needs to get taken care of right away. Okay, great. So there's that. Emergencies set themselves, that's fine. So that medium tends to be this big blob in the middle, but somebody has to take the input and schedule those priorities. Some priorities should automatically be set. I believe every ticket should open with a medium priority until somebody triages it and sets it as something else, either higher or lower. Now, if a client puts in a ticket, they're going to put it in at a higher priority. Somebody, again, needs to regulate that as well. So once you've done that, the technicians don't have to worry about the onslaught, the noise, the buzz, the never-ending flow of tickets. Your technicians should never be overwhelmed with an amount of work you have in your system because they should see one ticket at a time. I'm a huge believer in the pull system for ticket management, meaning that a technician should know which tickets they can work, what they're authorized to work, and what they are capable of working. And then they look at the tickets, they've finished the job, and they say, okay, what's the highest priority, oldest ticket that I can work? They assign it to themselves, they work that ticket, and when they are done with it, they go and say, okay, what's the highest priority, oldest ticket that I can work next? And if they do it this way, they only have to worry about the one ticket in front of them. The other bunch of tickets, that onslaught, that's the service manager's problem. That is not the technician's problem. The technician is doing everything they can to put their skills and their energy into the one job in front of them. This regulates their flow, lowers their stress. If technicians have to work the work and worry about the huge backlog, it just is a sidetrack. It's literally a distortion that keeps them focused on something other than the work in front of them. Do not stress out your technicians by having them feel any pressure whatsoever about the backlog. If your backlog is right, meaning it's the right size, that means that you have enough people scheduled to work, enough hours, they are effective enough so that all of the work can get done in the amount of time that you think is reasonable. And I frequently go through something in an online class where I have people talk about their backlog. And the thing that's really clear is my backlog and your backlog can be completely different because it doesn't matter. Yours is unique based on the billability, the effective working load of your team. So you might have somebody who's 80% effective and somebody who's 90% and somebody who's 70 and a bunch of people that are 60 and your service manager is probably 40. That's fine. They got other stuff to do. What is the team? What's the mix of the team? And if the team is, say, 60% billable, that means for every 40 hours that they are paid to show up for work, they are able to close 24 hours worth of tickets, 24 hours worth of labor. And that's quite reasonable. Do not think that you have to have these super high numbers that everybody brags about that are 99% not real. Human beings in a company need to have breaks. They have to have personal time off. They go to meetings. They sometimes don't get paid to do things like drive to a client's office, or they get paid, but but you don't get to bill anybody for it. They don't get to bill for sales meetings. They don't get to bill for internal meetings, checking their email, cleaning their desk, whatever. There's lots of overhead to just running a business. So the bottom line is, let's say that your team is 60% billable. Okay, well, if you have 1,000 hours of labor in your system, then you can just do the math and figure out how many hours do you need to buy in order to knock that down and set up the time schedule it needs to be done in. You should be able to figure out exactly how long you have to work through a backlog in order to get it worked down to zero. But again, the goal is never to get it to be zero, because you got all this scheduled labor, right? What's a manageable backlog for your company? What's a manageable backlog for your team and for your processes and procedures? It's really nearly impossible to compare those across companies. So you want the uniqueness? That's where your uniqueness comes in, is how you manage it and how quickly you manage your backlog. You also may have trained your clients to be very, very needy in case, the exact same processes and procedures are going to result in a higher backlog. You may have also trained your clients to put a lot less pressure on your team, in which case they say, look, I know these guys are going to get it done in a day or two, so I'm just going to set it as a low priority and they'll figure it out. Once you prove yourself to your clients, they learn that they can put in tickets in something other than a super high priority or an emergency, even though human beings can't set emergencies. Bottom line is, there's lots of things that you can do to manage the flow of tickets in your system. Basically, it comes down to you have to pay attention to it. You need to draw a diagram, how systems work, how your ticketing system workflow gets managed, and which points are you going to pay attention to. Set those priorities. Make sure absolutely everything has a priority. Make sure, this is the unspoken part about the video so far, make sure there is a time estimate on every single ticket and that it gets updated every time a technician touches it. And that way your backlog is an accurate number. Track the billability of your team as a team and don't push them on it. I am a firm believer. If you start posting up the billability of every technician, you're just going to drive down the attitude of your own technicians. Don't put them in a competition that separates them from pride in their work. Talk about the team, manage the team. You can manage individuals one-on-one. You don't need to put their name on a board that says that they have the lowest productivity and they have for the last 3 months. That's not really going to serve you very well. Serving you well will be managing your team as a team and managing individuals as individuals. Obviously, I have a lot to say on this subject, so if you have any comments or questions, put them down below. I would love to have your feedback. I'd also love a subscribe and a thumbs up, and share this with your friends if you found value in it. For Small Biz Thoughts, this is Carl Polachuk, wishing you the best of luck in everything you do.